after ROM, if you have an IO ROM. So I had come across two of them actually. One I'd done it here and kind of played with it. And so in the last year, a lot of things have changed in the world of the HP-75. And I have a new assessment of it, so I thought I'd share some of that and perhaps see of the 10 to 15 hands I think that went up. Probably most of you aren't using it, though I did get an email from Steve Thomas, who was sorry he couldn't be here, saying...
8 hands going up.
I'm sorry, 8. And Steve, who says it was one of his favorite machines ever, he's sorry he couldn't be here because he wanted to talk about that. Overview, what we're going to talk about, the 75 itself. It was HP's first portable PC, introduced in '82, discontinued in '86. In addition to being the computer that we know and love, it had a built-in appointment mode, so you could have contacts and alarms and all those kinds of things that most people associate more with the 41 and the 71. The 75C and D are virtually identical. We'll talk about that. It was the first machine with IL. And what is your instinctive, what do you remember about the 75? The things you probably remember was it was really expensive, which is why I didn't get one back then. They were over $1,000, and it's one of only 2 machines that HP ever sold that went up in price over the years. It was big, it was slow, it was just kind of crude and awkward and inconsistent. And there was no information on it. There was no, the 41, the community dug it all out, and the 71, HP produced the IDS, but there was nothing to learn. And the journals didn't have anything at all. You could go through months and months and months of journals. That was my impression. That's what I remembered. Does anyone remember it as largely different from that? No? Okay.
Well,
the HP, the PPC computer journal, and you got the article in the 75 there.
Yeah, so we'll get to that.
I'd just like to say I was born about a month after these, so I don't remember.
So your memories of it are vague.
Yeah.
But if you use the 75 with the display interface and the printer, then as a system you can use
It's a very different system, but that's about $4,000 worth of.
Yeah, but it worked.
Yeah. In fact, well, I'll talk about it, but the 75 with a monitor is a totally different experience than without a monitor. So just some specs and so forth about the machine itself. It has a basic operating system. The CPU was derived from the Series 80. For people that don't know, the 75 and the 71 were developed both in Corvallis, but by competing teams. Not directly competing in an intentional sense, but in an actual sense. Specs on size. One of its chief limitations is it could use a maximum of 24K. There was capability within the machine of actually using essentially banked RAM, and there were efforts, and from a demonstration perspective, successful efforts to build stuff that would extend that, but it never really turned into anything viable in a sense of a product that could be purchased to easily do that. It uses the standard HP classic battery. Here's a photo of the battery bay, and it has this interesting extra tab here, which was never officially documented. The story is that HP intended to create a different kind of battery pack that was going to utilize it, but for whatever reason, the decision was made to pull that. But if you open a 75, and I'm going to hand some around, and please don't open them because I'll lose everything in them. Also, right here, you can't see, but this is a slot where a RAM card would go up in. So I wrote 16 plus 8. The machine came with 16, and the 8K module went in there. Uses the charger, the top cat adapter. The code name was Kangaroo, and it was probably one of the widest known code names of all the machines, and it was totally embraced by the development team. All of the documentation that was released and source code listings had pictures of kangaroos. There was all sorts of culture stuff within the code and the documentation that was released. There was sort of a dialogue between Room Man and Joey, which are 2 players, which were metaphors for 2 of the development team, of one imparting wisdom on the other and so forth. So you
Oh, I was just going to throw in at the 81 conference in Corvallis during the barbecue, Ron Young came out with a T-shirt that said "Roo Crew," with a kangaroo on it, and the machine hadn't been announced yet.
And his name will come up in a few minutes. He's still involved to this day. The actual board, if you take a 75 apart and you look at the circuit board, there is a picture of a kangaroo or an icon of a kangaroo right on the board. That's how serious the team. It was sort of I guess, a unifying and a team spirit sort of thing that they adopted. It has 3 ROM slots, HPIL port built in, card reader built in. Which is interesting because the 71 went a different way. The 75 was everything's built in and it's $1,100. Thank you. The 71 went those ports are optional and you can buy them if you need them. Supposedly in reaction to the standoff, it's too expensive. Why should I pay for all these ports if I don't need them? Make it modular. 32 character display and so forth. I don't need to read it all to you. The character set is interesting. It was a richer than average character set. There were a few math symbols, a few Greek symbols, currency symbols. There was also reverse video, which is kind of silly on an LCD, but again, on a monitor, on HPIL, it's actually quite effective and it's quite interesting. What else? The 75D came out, and there's a lot of, well, I'll say lack of information, not misinformation, on the 75D. A lot of people think it was a very different product with very different capabilities and so forth. In fact, the only difference is it cost a bit more. It added a port for a wand. Even the ROMs didn't change. Their versions A, B, and D of the ROMs made it out into the public, and I have a 75D with ROM level A. So it wasn't a change for ROM levels or any of that. This is a memory map or architecture, what have you, for a series, the 85, the original 85, where you have, oops, wrong button. The ROMs and the plug-in ROMs were essentially mapped in here, and you're just basically setting a bit for which ROM. It's kind of a ROM select thing, and you jump into the code, and there was RAM here. And some I/O vectors and these sorts of things. So this is what is in an HP-85. And for the 75, they essentially took the same architecture with the same CPU, but made a few changes. Oops, but you can see the RAM, because one extra ROM was taken here, that RAM is even more restricted because there's operating system pointers and memory and various other things. Plus the file system lived in RAM too. Unlike in the Series 80 where the program you're running is currently in RAM, the storage, the 75 let you store files in RAM. So the limited 24K was even more limited by the fact that a lot of your programs were stored there.
So the 75 and 85 actually use the same CPU?
Different process, but yeah. Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. In fact, well, I'll get to some of that. And okay, it's me. These ROMs are the ROMs that could be plugged into the 3 ports that I talked about. But actually, you can logically plug in more ROMs than the 3 slots. And so devices came about, I'll talk in a minute. But you can just see going back and forth between the two, yeah, clearly the goal was minimal change, just a CMOS instead of desktop power and these kinds of things. Some key peripherals in the line. The expansion pod. This may be a good time to get the toys going. Here's a 75. You remember those plastic geeky calculator stands?
Yep.
Well, if you sand them down and glue 3 together, it's the perfect stand, and really reveling in my geekness. I have my pill box mounted inside, and coming around using official pill clips available through HPCalc at the time. It was, of all the things holding in my hands, that clip was the hardest to come by.
You turn it upside down, it doubles as electric guitar effect pedal from the West.
So I'll send around, this is a 75D, D. Oh, they're both Ds. I thought I had seen D. This is a 75 itself. Turn it on, do whatever you like with it. I'm going to start here and they'll work their way back there.
You have a fourth ROM in it?
I do not. Well, I have a soft one, not in there. And this is with the pod. Turn it on and do whatever, but please don't open the battery thing because we'll lose everything. This is the pod that basically adds a modem, a 300 baud dial-up modem, plus the ROM commands for very high-level application support. You could just say dial, connect, and so forth. Any kind of terminal emulation was based on your code, but you could map the escape sequences and all that. But the bottom line is you could actually do things relatively easily without knowing things like interrupt vectors and all kinds of nonsense usually associated with modems in the early days.
Didn't AT&T have a dedicated version of that pod with their branding on it?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't bring that one. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. In fact, a lot of them you'll see, basically that's replaced with AT&T. They had a vertical application.
That's frustrating. I know I had one years ago and it's gone now.
Well, I may have that one now. Who knows?
Maybe I brought it as a surprise.
No, I got it somewhere else. But it may have worked its way through through eBay. So this is the pod. The pod itself connected through. Here's one port. Here's the second port. Here's the third port. The pod itself connected through this. It also had an E-disk, sort of a RAM disk, which interestingly for a time it had a hierarchical file structure, so you could make folders and so forth. It came in 32K and 64K versions, but I've never seen a 32K. I guess anyone who's gonna, shoot for the moon and spend an extra $800 is not gonna cut themselves short for the RAM disk. It also has a speaker jack on it, which is an interesting thing I've not yet got to the bottom of. Some of them have a speaker jack, some don't.
It's connected to the beeper, and then you could put ears, and then for the one doing inventory scanning, you would hear it beeps.
But some of the pods don't have it, and there's no different part numbers and so forth. Also, there were, in the front, when you assemble it, basically the two side pieces hold it down. When you assemble it, there were little metal clips that you could put that would slide out, so you could, the idea was sort of to have like a neck strap so that the thing could hang and you can carry it at your side for the stylish mobile businessman carrying this on his hip, I guess, at the time.
Question mark, I noticed that the magnetic card reader doesn't have any mechanical parts and there's no rubber wheels or anything like that.
Correct.
And do you find that, is it still working okay?
Yep, still works fine.
And
I mean, some
you don't
cards
have that, you don't get that with the HP-41 card reader.
No, it's like the 71. It requires you to calibrate yourself to know the right speed, but it knows things like you pulled it. It says pull too fast, pull too slow. So basically, you put the card in up to an indexing mark, and then you hit enter, and then.
But there's no rubber parts that get old and disintegrate.
It's just the magnetic head. And the card set came with one of those red cards for head cleaning, which at the time, if you're using it moderately often, you never really had to use, and nothing wore out, nothing went bad. That's why to this day, every one I have, they work. I have found 71 card readers that won't work, but I've never found a 75 that won't work. Probably because they were hardly ever used.
Do you have any trouble finding cards?
Nope, not really. I mean, at what price? But no, you can find cards. There's guys on eBay that are selling sets of 10 cards for $25. There's guys that are selling 10 cards for $100. But like anything, if you look around, so there's plenty of supplies. One guy had a listing surveying how many. Oh no, those are 41 cards. No, weren't they 75 cards?
No,
Look,
that's
the 1,000 cards, or
but that's a 41.
that was 41.
The 75 and the 71 cards, the maximum you could buy is 100. There was 30, pack of 30, and pack
30
of
and
100.
But the upshot is, if you're interested in doing it, and it's really just for nostalgia reasons and all that, they don't hold enough to make it worthwhile. They're still available, and they still work. Or some still work. So that's what the expansion pod was all about. One of the cool things about the E-disk in the expansion pod is if you run into a memory loss, it retains memory. Other than lack of power, it retains the memory. So if you're developing, as is often when you're first learning a machine or whatever, doing gory internal stuff, you can trash the machine, but all your stuff is still there. The barcode wand is unspectacular, but the ROM in the pod included decodes for code 11 and code 39, which at the time were two of the most popular retail codes. A lot of vertical stuff used other codes, but it was a no-brainer for a company that wanted to use them for inventory and stuff like that, which is what those codes were used for primarily back then. The plug-in module simulator, seen here, plugs into the port, which is odd that this is the picture that was on the manual, and it says always plug it into the third port, but it could actually hold, I believe, 6 8K ROM images. And the idea was this was a means for you to generate a soft version of the ROM to load your Lex files and basic programs in. The 75 used Lex files analogous to the 75 and basic programs. There was no notion of a binary program. You had a Lex file, which was written in assembler, and basic programs. And each ROM could have only one Lex file. In fact, each ROM had to have exactly one Lex file, so there were even no Lex files that had to be put in because you had to have one, that sort of thing. There was also, this is a sample I actually got from Dan of an environmental case made by, this one was made by Oregon Digital Systems. This was used, I sort of bugged out the ROM and decoded it and all that. It was used by Oregon Digital Systems, which is a logging kind of company that was doing logging in eastern, what was the name of the town? Some small town in eastern Oregon. If you, I'm sorry?
So it contains log files, you say?
Not his logs, real logs. If you look at the keyboard, the Sept keyboard, it's actually interesting that it has almost no correlation with the built-in keyboard. Not that it needs to, because most people using it saw only this interface. And this one's kind of beat up and all that, but it's actually a good example because it works fine to this day. It had a special port here with a big connector that essentially had a custom cable that went to the power adapter and the HPIL.
So it did its job.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was mostly used for surveying. People, ODS cases were a lot used by surveying people.
I assume so, just because of the nature of it. This particular one was, it had to do with forestry and logging, just from the words that you can see in it, all that. And the town, the name of the ROM I looked up is a town in eastern Oregon, which is a logging place.
It's Western Oregon, Yamhill, and I think this was like for timber scaling to cut the logs and how many board feet are on your truck kind of nonsense.
It seems like related to loading up the truck with logs.
Yeah.
There were, of course, the standard suite of application ROMs, VisiCalc, which was actually very notable at the time. This was the first portable spreadsheet application that existed in the business world, and it was quite a feat because this is an 8K ROM. So to get VisiCalc down into 8K and ROM was a notable accomplishment. It was presumably derived from the VisiCalc that had been done for the 85 series.
85, yeah, they had it.
But the 85 series was disk-based. Disk was a huge code opportunity relative to 8K ROM.
I thought it was 32K with bank switching.
I don't think so. From the ROM. Oh, wait. It might be 24. You're right. I think there's three pages. But still, you still got to break it down into the Lex files and all that other stuff. But there's also the standard expected text formatter, the math ROM, datacom, surveying. So all of the application types that you've come to expect from an HP product at the time. The ROM that's quite different is the I/O ROM, which is really somewhat mislabeled, but the name came from in Series 80. They had an I/O ROM that added things needed to do, not fundamental I/O, but effectively useless I/O. But in the case of the 75, it actually adds a whole bunch of other things categorized by them into advanced programming and system control. But what it really comes down to is a whole bunch of things that are needed to make the system more useful. Things like bitmaps and doing binary and hex and the things that you have to do that are sort of worker routines to make I/O functions useful. It also has some interesting commands. In the case of the 75, anything, like if you want to run the program XYZ, you have to actually say run space, quote, XYZ, close quote, enter, which is annoying as all hell to run a program. One of the cool little features that's in there is if you run this command, in order to run the program XYZ, you just say XYZ instead of run, quote, and this and that. So things like that just, it took it from being awkward, you know, they actually took feedback from people that said, you know, the top 30 things that suck and can't get done and addressed that. That ROM was developed by none other than the very Ron Young that Jake was mentioning earlier. And there's a whole series of solution books across the normal things. There were also the normal expected third-party products. There was word processing. There was a fourth ROM that exists. It's out and about.
I don't remember for the 75. I do remember for the 71. But if anybody has a machine and they're interested in solutions books or owner's manuals, talk to me.
Okay. What are you doing after this conference?
I got 15 people coming to my house.
The flavor of BASIC is very quirky, as are all flavors of BASIC, but always in very different ways. The 71 flavor is quirky, but I've done it for so long it seems normal. The 75 flavor is quite quirky, but derived from and inspired by the 85 version, which anyone who's used it would also agree that that's very quirky. It had the given standard functional set with the basic commands, but it could be extended by Lex files written in assembler so that you're essentially adding new keywords to the system. One of the unique features that, to my knowledge, is only in the 75 on all machines is all of the common commands, like cat all is something that you just do 100 times a day just to verify your files. It's just a catalog, a directory listing. On the 75, it was abbreviated to C ... So instead of typing cat all, you just type C ... which is really 2 keystrokes, right? Because a repeat of a keystroke is a half a keystroke. So C ... you could do so fast. And this was true for almost every command, most of which you don't do often enough that you don't remember what they are, but the very common ones were cleverly selected to be the easiest ones using things like these half keystroke things. But the most annoying thing to me, and I presumably to a lot of people, is every single device or file specifier that you specify in a basic program or on the command line has to have the annoying quotes around it. My feeling is if they had found a better parser, it probably would have made the machine more successful. Wouldn't have taken that much more to do it. The 71 proves that. Arguably, the 71's better solution was in response to reaction here. So you have to do this colon device is, so this is saying copy a file name on the first mass storage device to a file with a new name on the second mass storage device. But even things like if I want to just list the basic program, you have to say list, quote, my file, quote. Kind of annoying. Here's some sample code of some of the quirky things. I just tried to pick things that are unobvious and weird. On the 71, I could say copy file name on device X, period, and it would just, the presumed default was to wherever I am. It copies it to here, so to speak. But it couldn't do that, but you would also think it might say copy file on D1 to D2, and presumably it could guess that if you're not specifying the file name, it would use the same file name. Well, that also doesn't work. But oddly, you can say copy from D1 to file example without specifying that. So what this does is it copies the file name example on D1 to a file name example in RAM, where I am. So just quirky, weird things. Why it would do this but not this, don't know. These are 2 lines from a program I found in a journal issue. Anyone care to guess why it's written this way? Like, what? Cosine epsilon? On cosine epsilon? What is that? Anyone guess why that's done? What's your first reaction? Why would they do that? just, instinct. Why would a program say on cosine, epsilon is the minimal machine, right? That's like 0.000, 1 times 10 to the 490,
So-
negative 499.
so-
So cosine of 0 is
So if you didn't have
1.
that, if you didn't have
So, on 1 or, so that's really 1, right? So why would they do that? Why would they not just say 1?
Slow the
if
program
they didn't have a
down.
Boolean not,
I don't know. No, my reaction was the same as yours. This must be faster. It must be faster to do cosine of epsilon than 1.
Yeah,
But that's-
like in many machines of our RPN machines, entering a digit, entering the numerals of a real number is a very slow operation. And the WP34, for example, is a good example.
As soon as I see weird stuff like that, and it was in the journal, so it came from, this mindset. Why would somebody write something so obscure? Well, it must be faster that way. Turns out it's not. So why else would you do it?
Kind of weird type conversion thing going on there.
No?
Job security?
The answer is obvious once you know it, like most. It's smaller. It's much smaller. That takes, I believe, 1 byte. No, maybe 2. Versus the number 1, which takes like 4 or 5 bytes sort of thing. So most specifically, the reason when I took this program and typed it in, it does not, and I said, I'm going to learn this program after a moment of thinking about this, I said, I'm going to make them 1 so I understand how the program works, so I'm not getting distracted by that. It won't fit on a card. But if you change all of those 1s to cosine eps, it will fit on a card.
Oh, my.
So that's the kind of quirky stuff that, only, journal programs and, this crowd would have come up with. So when you first start looking at these programs, they're very obscure looking and, and that's, information that's been lost to time. Back in the day, anyone reading it, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense sort of thing. But, who the heck remembers that?
There's another reason to put something obscure, to defeat anybody from figuring out what the code does.
Yeah, sometimes. But, and it took me a while because my first thought was, it's got to be speed. It has to be speed. So I made a program and did 100 of these and 100 of those, and it's much slower. Why would they do that? So particularly in a loop or something. So as I said, it's a quirky language. When you look at the code, it's sometimes, not all code. I'm sure production code that's going in ROM probably was simpler to maintain and so forth. But it's interesting stuff. Collecting and buying. 75 units themselves are cheap and available at any given moment. You can go to eBay and find them. 2 weeks ago, did I have it? Yeah, 2 weeks ago, a 75 with a pod and batteries and an adapter was $225. Sold for $225. Which, if you consider that expensive, you're in the wrong room. I was very surprised. On the other hand, the ROMs, many of which you need to do stuff, are not. At any given moment, there's a spreadsheet ROM and a VisiCalc ROM that's $200 or $300 just for that ROM. An I/O ROM might be another $200. Just the manual for an I/O ROM is sometimes $75. But like anything, we talked yesterday, if you wait a while, you find stuff. In the same week, a math ROM sold for $50, and the Datacom ROM, which is really, really, really rare. How many people here have a Datacom ROM for $75? I know where you get yours.
No, I have about, I think, 4 or 5.
Of the Datacom set? Oh, but the whole package.
The whole pack is only 1.
Yeah. So that one's extremely rare. So actually, $225 is a really good price from a collecting viewpoint for that. So like anything, you can see stuff listed out there for $300 and wait a few weeks and see the same thing for $50.
How much was the Datacom ROM?
$225.
Oh,
But that's not the ROM. That's the whole pack. That's the ROM and the early most of the early solution packs for the 75 came in a hard 3-ring binder. Remember the small 3-ring binders in the slipcase? It came with that. And the ROM and a quick reference card and the MAD cards and all that.
yeah, it was a big box, yeah.
Yeah.
I've got some of those.
The 75 works well with the HPIL, the little strip printer. It works well with the 9114. It works well with the cassette drive, but slow, and the ThinkJet. So all the peripherals work very well.
Impact printer also.
I'm sorry?
The impact printer.
Yep. Work. HPIB peripherals work fine through the IL to IB interface too. If you're looking at something, getting something, we, by chance of motivating you to look at it, these are the kind of things to ask about related to this machine. Any machine, you always want to see the battery bay. Ask them to post a photo. There's subtleties. I've asked people, could you please post a photo of the battery bay? And you get a picture of the battery bay with the battery in it. So I've learned to ask, please post a photo of the battery bay without the battery so we can see the contacts and those sorts of things. Because like all the other machines, a lot of those old NiCads have been sitting there for 24 years, have just corroded and just melted away the brass contacts. If you remember a photo I had somewhere, I don't know if you can see it well, right there, right on the left corner, you can see a gap right along here. There's a post in the front left of the machine which on an awful lot of machines has broken inside. So you'll see a gap there, and if you just grab it, it sort of opens up. That's a common problem. Though, if you're not planning to take it apart, it doesn't matter very much. But if you see that, you can just ask about that. Most sellers haven't a clue. Unlike most of the calculators, a lot of sellers just don't know much about what this is. A lot of times you'll see the description is a word-for-word copy-paste from the museum site, things like that. Yep.
What's the ratio of C's to D's?
Made, I can't say. Available seems to be more C's than D's, but not 5 to 1 or anything like that. Maybe 3 to 2 or something like that. A lot of D's were, as Dave mentioned, a lot of D's were private labeled. AT&T is another company.
And what was the primary difference? Just one memory?
Well,
The logo.
The difference between those was a one port. And then you got 2 ones that you can use. And then you need the barcode one, the barcode module, or the expansion pod to be able to decode. The barcode module add more barcode, you understand more barcode type.
Yeah.
Because the pod only understand 2.
So the pod the pod was only sold with 75. Well, once 75 was introduced, the 75C was discontinued when the D was introduced, and thereafter, that's when the pod came. The pod had decode for 2 types of barcode, but they sold a barcode 1 that added 6 or 7 additional types, something like that. So a lot of them were used by large.
Would the wand read UPC?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all kind of that's inside the barcode module. Okay, or the expansion pod. The one itself was able to read all kind of barcode, but you needed the module in order to understand that.
To decode. So you could just say, give me the ASCII decode of whatever you scan. And the one itself, by the way, physically is the same as the 41 one with a different connector. And again, I don't know how to test means does not work in a lot of cases. Because the 75 is a pretty resilient machine. If you put batteries in it and hit on and it doesn't come on, it's probably a serious issue.
What can you get batteries for it or?
Yeah, it's a classic battery adapter.
Uh-huh.
The 3565 battery adapter. And the pod takes 2 batteries.
And the barcode reader, is it the same one that you use with the 41 and others?
The wand itself, the wand end that you hold is physically the same, but the connector is different. It's unique to the port on the back. I'll show you on the 75. There's a socket on the back of it.
Nate Martin also has made 3D printed front plug-in replacement and also the battery cover. And when I'm back home, he asked me to send him a pod, so we're gonna make also the battery holder, the battery door for the pod also.
Who has the pod?
They're back here.
Okay.
Thanks
So-
for everybody, but.
Okay, yeah, well anyhow, the port covers that frequently you'll find machines listed cheap because there's no port covers, there's no way to get them. Good news.
I've got a box of them.
I've heard that and I've tried getting them.
I saw the box 24 hours before I left because I'm looking for something else.
I would like for you to stay after school for a short discussion.
Remind me, but I'll certainly forget.
I mentioned earlier that there's been a resurgence of interest. Why is that? Well, in December of last year, interestingly enough, some of it followed, well, there's a Series 80 group that used to be on Yahoo Groups that last year got moved over to groups.io, which is essentially the successor of what was Yahoo Groups. A guy named Everett Kaiser, who was on the 85 development team in Corvallis, and most people that have been around have heard the name somewhere along the way.
And the 95 LX team as well.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, interesting. Very interesting, great old guy. He has made an 85 emulator through which a lot of the 85 community has resurged interest, and you can do things with discs, and it can be an 85 or an 87. And it continues to evolve regularly. It goes through a lot of different updates. Some discussions about the 75 began on the 85 forum. So he said, well, if there's enough interest here, let's split it off. And he did in December of 16. And there's something, 40 to 50 members. Lots of resources, and I'll talk about that there. Files you can download. Traffic on there is very bursty. May go 45 days without a message, and then the next day somebody posts something, and there's 200, and the next, just
Well,
whatever.
how about the museum, right?
No. This is a group, like a news group. This is
Oh.
sort of the latter-day equivalent of a news group. So something will happen, and then there'll be a lot of activity responding to that, and even tangentially related things that come out of it. Like once everyone's been prodded and told, hey, wake up, remember this is here, they engage and start talking.
So if you want to sell something, that's the place to sell it?
It's a news group. You can do, you can advertise dancing girls. Whatever you want. You can't sell through it, but you could say, and people do, hey, I have this or that. Is anyone interested? Contact me, and you can contact them, like the museum, via PM or email or what have you.
Okay.
The thing I find odd is you must be a member to be on the list and get stuff, and then you can choose to be a visible member with a name like Bob or an anonymous member. And a curiously large percentage of the people are anonymous. I don't really get that, but
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't follow what that's about. But if somebody is, and they would like to explain to me why one would do that, I'd love to hear that. I'm not judging. I'm just confused.
Paranoia.
Sorry?
Paranoia.
Yeah. But it's hard for me to get that level of paranoia and interested in the 75. It's kind of those are, what are they, disjoint sets or something? Also, Jean-Francois Gagne, who most people here know as the guy that made EMU 41, EMU 71, and the pillbox, a very prolific and interesting and talented guy. In a discussion that took place on this news group, was essentially challenged in a throwdown. I bet you couldn't make any 75 emulator, and it turns out he had dabbled with it, 20 years ago. But he just went quiet for 2 months. And if you know Jean-Francois, if he's quiet for a few months, something's happening. And one day, after a couple months, he announced, "Hey, I have a beta of an emulator." The emulators, just like his EMU 41 and 71, are DOS-based, so it's character mode, but they run just fine in DOSBox. Very easy to set up. They run perfectly on Mac, Windows, Unix, anything that runs DOSBox. I'm told it'll even run on an Android phone. And in it, here's a screenshot of it. I found a little utility that'll let you expand the DOS box to 60 columns. So this is the CRT display out on HPIL, if you will, and here's the command line. So it's almost like you have a monitor for it, and you can use it that way. His other emulators, the CPU emulation, is written in assembler, so they're much, on a modern PC, much faster than the original machine. For his first go-around with this, he's written the CPU emulation in C, so it's not quite as fast, but it's also, it's slower than the others. You can feel that, but it's not slow in the sense of you're waiting for it or something. It runs all the ROMs, all the software, anything you want. Recently, someone actually came up with a ROM image of the diagnostic ROM, And I think within 48 hours, he had the emulator running those portions that are relevant of the diagnostic ROM, which is, a testament to just how accurate that is. And like all the software, it's free. Just download it and run it. And so if you're at all curious about a 75 and you're one of the whatever 44 minus 8 is that don't have one and you're curious about it, just download it and set it up and run it. It's pretty cool, interesting. Also, out on the news group, as I mentioned, I said there's a lot of resources. The source code for the OS, the source code for the ROMs, all of the Lex files that are relevant and so forth have appeared through anonymous donation. In parallel with that, Ron has been making comments and so forth. I'm not saying that these two are related activities. There could be no relation at all. Ron does not participate directly. He participates indirectly through Kaiser. My speculation is that's to minimize the number of direct emails saying, how do you do this and how do you do that? Ron still is in the Corvallis area. If you poked around on the website, on the museum website, and you've ever read the blurbs that Dave wrote about the various machines, on the 75, he wrote that he got interested in the 75 and he found one listed online and he decided to buy it. And the guy that he bought it from not only had all the stuff and sold it to him, he actually drove over and delivered it to him where he lived 3 hours away. It was Ron. So, hasn't been involved in this in 40 years, but his heart is still, clearly very much in it. He still had a lot of, no, he didn't have materials. Someone still had interesting materials. So a lot of stuff is there. If you're interested and you want to dabble and you want to go digging into ROMs and all that, there's, more than you will ever actually know. Here's a kind of typical example. Everyone here remember the IDS listings for the 71? They were 4 up, one page was 4 pages photocopied down. I think it was Martin Hepperl took that for the 75, and because he's one of those kind of guys that can do that.
That was
Ron Young, R-A-A-N.
Yeah, he was
Young.
part of the development team.
He wrote a lot of it. He took that document, which are annoyingly hard to read because there were crappy scans and this and that, but he took that document and turned it into 1 up per page. So, what was 400 PDF pages like that is now 1,600 pages, but you can read it.
Yeah, I did that with the 71.
Oh, yeah? Well, we'd like to see that too.
I
want to have more documents I won't read.
It's on the HP Museum CD-ROM, so.
Oh, then I do have it.
Yeah.
I have the paper ones, which is what I go to first. How weird is that? They're also searchable. I'm sorry, the new PDFs are searchable,
yeah, mine are not.
which is key. The point is, there's more gory detail than any one person would ever really want to use.
Well, he since he worked at HP and he was very interested, when he left, I'm sure a lot of that documentation was.
And if it had come from there, that probably would be why.
Well,
but I'm not saying it did.
He just wants to be low key, just
Yeah.
not to rock the boat,
So I have a revised view, and that's why on the page, the first page, it said it really doesn't suck if you have an I/O run. So some of the initial precepts I brought to it turn out to not be true. It's now much more affordable. It works well with all the other toys that if you play in the HPIL world. It seems like huge and unreasonably large. Who would ever do that until I traveled with a small and light laptop for a number of years, and now the 75 doesn't seem so big. I still find it less refined than the 71, the basic, less refined than the 71B, but that's probably a bias from 30 years of knowing mine was better. And the most interesting fact in all of this is at the beginning I said, remember the PPC journals and the True Journal and all that had almost no information on the 75? Well, it turns out somehow they snuck it in there in their last 30 years, and it actually is all there if you go look for it now, which led to a good lesson for me. One often doesn't see what one isn't looking for or what one hates. So, I would go through the journal, and I'm sure everyone here went through this. You go through the journal looking for the stuff you want, and you don't even see the stuff you don't want. And it feels like it's not even there. Are we interrupted? Somehow I've always wanted to say that as.
Turn off.
I can turn it off. So a lot of my core memories of it are in fact wrong and very much driven by bias at the time, which is good to know. It's not good to know I was wrong for that many years, but good to know that it was there and it's still something to go explore now. Some thanks, one to Jim. I was hoping Jim would be here. Jim was the prototypical 75 enthusiast. When it first came out, he was all over documenting everything and finding stuff. And one of my earliest core memories of PPC and the group and what it meant was in the early 80s, Jim was the 75 guy and Joe was the 71 guy. Jean-Francois, thank you for EMU 75 and the pillbox. Of course, Ron and Everett for the contributions. And Martin, who provided those architecture diagrams. He also shared some information on how to write Lex files for the 75, cross-assembling on an 85, which HP never produced a development tool to let you do that, but there was a fourth tool for doing it, not unlike the 71 fourth assembler. But it can be done. So that's lost knowledge, and it has been regained. So that's it from the presentation. And I want to thank these people. Any questions or more stories?
Well, when I was cruising, I Googled HP-75, and what I got was print cartridges.
You didn't do minus ink. You got to do minus ink.
Have you ever tried to connect to the internet with the 75?
Not yet. Mostly because dial-up access at 300 baud is very hard to find. But you can use the HPAL modem at higher speed, and I just haven't got around to doing that. But the question is, who do you connect to? What at the time there was Dow Jones and the other services, but today, who do you connect to? Who here still has dial-up service?
AOL,
Where'd you go?
maybe AOL.
No AOL client. You have to pay for that now. So man.
You got all the solution books are also on GrouPIO.
Yeah.
Okay. And also, what I do for playing is that you can buy a phone line speaker with, and then you can use the acoustic coupler and the pod, and you can transfer file between the 71 and 75, or between 75 and so on.
Also, in the manual, it tells you how to connect two 75s together and chit-chat back and forth. My wife has refused. Since I have 275, I only want 5. I was going to say, that could be an evening activity. Yes, sir.
As usual, there's an
Oliver Sept on Android, and it turns 55D in a very small device on a 7-inch Android tablet.
Which emulator?
75D. Olivier de Smet. Go 75.
Oh, I didn't know. Go, yeah? I didn't know he had a 75. I probably should have guessed, but I didn't realize he had a 75 emulator. Good, isn't it? Not so bad. I'll have to assess it. Let me borrow this. Anyhow, thanks.
Borrow is okay.